What would you do if your father's last words were a warning? Not to mourn, not to remember, but to erase your sibling. That's exactly what happened on a cold, quiet Sunday in Brentwood, when Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead, stabbed, brutally, inside the sanctuary they called home for 3 decades. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But this wasn't just another Hollywood tragedy. This wasn't another case of fame spiraling into scandal. This was personal. This was war inside one of Hollywood's most private dynasties. And at the center of it all stood a sealed envelope, a man known for comedy, Billy Crystal, and a final wish so devastating, it nearly tore the surviving family apart. Don't leave Nick anything. Not the house. Not the fortune. Not even a photo. That line didn't come from a heated argument. It wasn't screamed during a fight. It was written, deliberately, carefully, and signed by Rob Reiner himself. But let's back up, because before the envelope, before the blood-soaked discovery, before the world gasped at the headlines, there were whispers, uneasy looks, unspoken fears, and one daughter, Romy, who ran barefoot across the marble floor, tears streaming down her face, begging 911 to come fast, because something was very, very wrong. Are you ready for the truth behind the Reiner family's darkest night? Are you ready to discover the secrets Billy Crystal has held on to in silence until now? Then buckle up, because this story is nothing like the smiling photos or red carpet appearances. This is a story of betrayal, denial, and a father's shocking final stand. Let's begin. Rob Reiner. You know the name. When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride. A Hollywood giant. A storyteller. A father. At 78, Rob was considered a pillar, not just of film, but of values. Family. Loyalty. Quiet strength. His wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, an activist, a creative force in her own right, the kind of woman who lit up a room without saying a word, was always at his side. 40 years. No public scandals. No gossip column chaos. Just love. Or so we thought. Behind the mansion gates of their $13.5 million Brentwood estate, the truth was darker. And it wasn't hiding in shadows. It was sleeping in the guest house. Nick, the troubled son, 32 years old. Once described by a family friend as a wildfire nobody knew how to put out. Nick Reiner, who had lived in the guest house for years, reportedly, to get back on his feet. A quiet arrangement, the kind Hollywood families don't discuss in interviews. But on Sunday, December 14, silence became screams. The bodies were found mid-morning. According to LAPD reports, Romy Reiner, 27, arrived at the house after not hearing from her parents for over 12 hours. The details of what she saw have not been fully released to the public, but sources inside the investigation confirmed what she told Dispatch. There's blood everywhere. My parents. I think they're gone. And I think I know who did it. Those chilling words ignited a firestorm. Because the person Romy allegedly identified wasn't a stranger. It was her brother. And not long after police arrived, they found Nick on the property, in the guest house. Calm, silent, uncooperative. He was arrested that night and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Just like that, a Hollywood family was shattered. But that's not where the story ends. Not even close. Because while investigators began piecing together timelines, searching for motive, and digging into Nick's disturbing digital footprint, another narrative was unfolding just feet away, inside the study. A sealed manila envelope, thick, labeled in neat handwriting, to be opened by Billy Crystal upon my death. No lawyer, no executor, no publicist, just Billy. And if that surprises you, it shouldn't. You see, Billy Crystal wasn't just Rob's colleague. He was his closest friend, the one person Rob trusted to understand not just his humor, but his pain. They had shared countless dinners, raised children side by side, and seen each other at their lowest. And now, Billy had been chosen to hear Rob's final words. Imagine this. You're Billy Crystal. You get the call. Your best friend has been murdered. You're asked to come to the Brentwood estate, not to identify a body, but to read a letter. You sit in the same chair where Rob once outlined movie plots. You open the envelope with trembling hands, and you see it. A handwritten letter, 5 pages long. A flash drive, labeled private, and the words, "Don't leave Nick anything." Not the house. Not the money. Not even a photo. He's already taken enough. Billy didn't cry right away. He didn't speak. He sat there, stunned. Because he knew this wasn't a man writing out of rage. This was calculated, thought through, planned. And that's where the real mystery begins. Why would Rob Reiner disown his son? Why would he go so far as to ask that nothing, not even a memory, be left behind? What did he know that we didn't? To answer that, we have to dig deeper. Into Nick's past. Into the quiet conflicts that never made headlines. Into the therapy sessions cut short. The screams behind closed doors. The whispered warnings that no one wanted to believe. We also have to hear from the other siblings, Tracy and Jake. Both successful, both loved by Rob, and both blindsided by the contents of that will. Especially the clause that tied their inheritance to silence. Yes, you heard that right. If either Tracy or Jake contested the decision to disinherit Nick, they'd lose everything too. This wasn't just a will. It was a fortress, a legal trap, an act of desperation, or of protection. And at the center of it all, standing between the flames and the final wish, was Billy Crystal, who now found himself as both messenger and mourner. He didn't speak publicly for days. Not at the memorial, not to the press, not even to family. Until finally, when the silence became unbearable, he sat down and recorded a video. No script, no camera crew, just one man, honoring another. And in that video, still unreleased to the public, Billy reportedly reads from the letter. His voice breaks. He pauses, and then he speaks the words no child ever wants to hear their parent write. If something ever happens to me, don't leave Nick anything, not even a photo, because the man I once called my son no longer exists. Cold, heartbreaking, necessary, or something more complicated than we can understand. We'll explore that in the chapters ahead. You'll hear from those who knew the Reiners best, and those who feared them most. You'll step inside the family's darkest days. The lawsuits, the therapy notes, the secret recordings. You'll hear what Romy told police, word for word. And we'll show you the one video Jake Reiner recorded in secret, the one even Tracy didn't know existed. But be warned, this is not a fairy tale. There are no clean endings, only grief, regret, and the haunting truth of what happens when love and legacy collide. Because in the end, this isn't just about Rob Reiner, or Billy Crystal, or even Nick. This is about what we leave behind. And sometimes, what we choose not to. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What makes someone snap? Is it a moment? A build-up? A silence that finally screams? Or is it something darker? Something already lurking, waiting for its time to strike? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. December 14th was no ordinary morning. It was the day Brentwood, a neighborhood known for wealth, prestige, and privacy, woke up to horror. And it started, as these things often do, with something small. A missed phone call. Then 2. Then 4. Michelle hadn't answered Romy's messages since the night before. Rob's phone went straight to voicemail. Not unusual on a movie set, but at home? Romy had tried to convince herself that maybe they were just sleeping in. Maybe her dad was in his studio, soundproof doors shut. Maybe her mom was meditating in the garden, phone left inside on silent. It was plausible, comforting even. Until it wasn't. Because at 10:18 a.m., Romy parked her car outside the family estate and noticed something immediately. The front gate was ajar. Not wide open. Not dramatically swinging. Just cracked. Like someone had slipped through quietly. She stepped out, barefoot. She always drove barefoot when anxious, a habit her mother found endearing. The gravel bit into her heels, but she barely felt it. What she did feel was the cold, not the weather. Los Angeles was a mild 62 degrees that morning, but the atmosphere, the way the air seemed too still. No gardeners, no birds, no gentle hum of the pool's water filter. Just nothing. The front door was locked. That reassured her. Maybe they were just inside. Asleep? She walked around back. The sliding glass door to the kitchen was open, just an inch. Enough to feel unnatural. She called out, "Dad." Nothing. She stepped inside. And then, silence broke. Not with a scream. Not with a crash. But with absence. The smell of iron hit her first. Then she saw her father's hand, motionless, slumped over the marble island. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She grabbed the cordless house phone, the one no one used anymore, and dialed 911. Her voice, as later transcribed from the emergency call, was calm, disturbingly so. "My name is Romy Reiner. I think my parents are dead. There's blood. I need help." The dispatcher asked if she could check pulses. I can't go closer. But I think I know who did it." Those words would send a ripple through Los Angeles, through Hollywood, through the Reiner family itself. Because the man she believed responsible wasn't a stranger. He was her brother, Nick Reiner, the black sheep, the ghost in the guest house. The 911 call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When police arrived, they found Romy on the back steps, pale, shaking, a blood smear on her knee, from brushing the kitchen floor without realizing it. Inside, the scene was surgical. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, just blood. 2 bodies, side by side. Rob's arm over Michelle's shoulder, her head on his chest, both stabbed multiple times. The coroner would later rule it multiple sharp force injuries for both. Manner of death, homicide. Time of death, likely between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. And in a cruel twist of fate, someone had tried to clean. Half a roll of paper towels stained red lay discarded by the sink. A trail of bleach led from the kitchen to the downstairs guest bathroom. It wasn't enough. There was still evidence. Prints, fibers, a partial footprint near the fireplace, barefoot, male, size 11. And in the study, an untouched envelope, thick, handwritten, sealed, to be opened by Billy Crystal. But that would come later. First, they had to find Nick. And they didn't have to look far. The guest house sat 50 feet from the main estate. It was originally built as a pool house, but renovated into a transitional living space for Nick after his 4th rehab stint. He hadn't moved out since. Police approached cautiously. No response to knocks. No movement inside. They entered with guns drawn and found him on the couch. Awake, calm, not surprised. Nick said nothing. He didn't resist. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply stood up, turned around, and placed his hands behind his back. That alone chilled the officers on scene. One would later testify. It was like he'd already rehearsed it. They searched the guest house. Bloodied clothes in the hamper. Shoes, missing one, the left sneaker, size 11. A kitchen knife, scrubbed, but missed one tiny speck, later confirmed to have Rob's DNA. But most chilling of all, a notebook. On the cover, screenplay. Inside, rambling dialogue. Arguments between father and son, mother begging them to stop, and a final scene. The son walking away, silent, while sirens wail in the distance. Was it fiction? Or was it a confession written in metaphor? Detectives weren't sure, but Billy Crystal was. Because while all this unfolded, while headlines screamed Hollywood horror and tabloids speculated motives, Billy sat in his office, letter in hand, stunned. It wasn't just the instructions that shocked him. It was the timing. Because inside the envelope, along with the handwritten letter and flash drive, was a second note. If you're reading this, something happened. And it probably wasn't an accident. Billy would later say that line haunted him. Because it meant Rob knew. He knew. Not just feared. Not suspected. Knew. But how? What had happened between father and son that made a man write those words? More importantly, was there a chance Rob knew his time was running out? Let's rewind. 4 weeks before the murder. Thanksgiving. The Reiner family gathered for dinner, an annual tradition. Romy brought her boyfriend. Tracy brought her daughters. Jake brought a bottle of wine and a camera, always documenting. Nick brought silence. He barely spoke. Ate alone on the patio. Refused to sit at the main table. There were no fights. No shouting. Just tension. Thick. Unspoken. After dinner, Rob pulled Billy aside. "I don't know him anymore," he whispered. "He's still your son," Billy replied. "That's what scares me." That night, Rob told Billy he'd written a letter, just in case. And he made Billy promise, if something happened, he'd read it. Not the lawyer. Not Tracy. Not even Michelle. Billy. The friend. The outsider. The one who wouldn't flinch. And now here they were. Rob and Michelle were gone. Nick was in custody. And Billy? He was the last witness to a warning no one wanted to believe. So what did the letter say? Why such venom? Why deny a man even a photo of his parents? We'll get to that. But first, we need to look at the final hours. The final movements. Because the timeline matters. According to phone records, Rob received a call at 2:41 a.m. from an unknown number. It lasted 23 seconds. The number was traced to a burner phone, purchased at a convenience store 2 days earlier, near Nick's favorite gym. At 2:59 a.m., the home's front motion sensor detected movement. 3:04 a.m., the kitchen lights came on. 3:06 a.m., the smart thermostat registered a sudden drop in temperature, likely from the back door opening. At 3:31 a.m., all lights went off. At 4:12 a.m., the guest house lights flicked on. At 10:18 a.m., Romy arrived. In those 6 hours, something happened. Something terrible. But perhaps the most heartbreaking detail? The security system had been deactivated at 3 a.m. from the main house panel. Meaning, whoever did this had the code. It wasn't forced entry. It was family. Let that sink in. Now ask yourself, why would Rob Reiner, a man beloved by millions, known for empathy and warmth, ask to disown his son? Why, in death, did he draw a line so sharp, so painful, so permanent? Why didn't he leave the lawyers to handle it? Why Billy? And what's on that flash drive? Because what's coming next is darker than anyone imagined. And Billy? He hasn't told the full truth. Not yet. But what he saw when he finally opened that file would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if the last thing your best friend ever asked of you was to protect a truth so dangerous it could destroy a family? Would you honor the request, or tell the world? That's the question Billy Crystal faced as the sun rose over Los Angeles, and the city began to realize something was terribly wrong in Brentwood. Billy hadn't slept. He sat alone in his study, the envelope resting on the desk like it weighed 100 pounds. He'd carried it out of the Reiner house himself, refusing to let police bag it as evidence. Not yet. Not before he read it. Not before he understood why Rob trusted him more than anyone else on earth. Billy had made a career out of making people laugh. But nothing in his life prepared him for the silence of that room. The kind of silence that hums in your ears. The kind that reminds you something is missing forever. He stared at Rob's handwriting. Neat. Controlled. No panic. No shakiness. That alone unsettled him. Because men who are afraid don't write like that. Billy finally broke the seal. The first page didn't start with "Dear Billy." It started with a sentence that felt like a punch to the chest. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to stop what I feared was coming. Billy read it again. And again. He leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware that his hands were trembling. Feared was coming. Not might come. Not worried could happen. Feared was coming. Rob had been living with this fear for a long time. Billy kept reading. I don't want lawyers explaining this away. I don't want therapists softening the truth. I don't want my children forced to choose sides in public. That's why this is with you. Billy swallowed hard. Rob wrote about love first. About Michelle. About gratitude. About how proud he was of Tracy and Jake. About Romy's compassion. Her sensitivity. Her way of seeing danger before others did. And then, the tone shifted. There is one thing I can no longer ignore. One truth I can't protect anyone from anymore. Nick is not well, and he hasn't been for a very long time. Billy paused. He knew Nick had struggles. Everyone did. Rehab, relapses, explosive arguments. But this felt different. Rob wasn't describing addiction. He was describing fear. I've tried everything. Doctors, money, time, distance, love, boundaries, forgiveness. Nothing works when someone refuses to see themselves as the problem. Billy's chest tightened, because he remembered the night Rob had called him at 1 a.m. 6 months earlier. Billy, Rob had whispered, what if loving someone isn't enough? At the time, Billy thought it was just exhaustion, just a father at the end of his rope. Now he wasn't so sure. The letter continued. There have been incidents I can't undo. Things I've covered up to protect the family. Things Michelle begged me not to talk about publicly. She was always the peacemaker. Always believed we could still save him. Billy felt his throat close. Because Michelle was gone too. And suddenly, this letter felt like a confession. Rob wrote about sleepless nights. About locking bedroom doors. About installing additional security cameras without telling Nick why. I hate myself for being afraid of my own son. But fear doesn't disappear just because you're ashamed of it. Billy put the page down. Let that line sit with you for a second. How many parents live in denial because admitting fear feels like betrayal? How many warning signs get ignored because no one wants to believe something this dark could happen inside their own home? Billy turned the page. This was where things became unbearable. I am writing this after Nick threatened Michelle. Not directly, not with words that could be used against him, but with tone, with implication, with the kind of look that says, you can't stop what I'm thinking. Billy closed his eyes. He remembered Michelle's smile. Gentle, patient, always smoothing things over. Had she been hiding this too? Rob described the night clearly. Nick had come into the house after midnight. Angry, accusing Rob of betrayal, of stealing his future, of choosing Hollywood over blood. He said I ruined his life, Rob wrote. That everything wrong with him began the day he was born into my shadow. Billy exhaled slowly. Nick had always resented the name, the expectations, the comparisons. But resentment wasn't murder. So why did Rob sound like he believed it could become that? The letter answered that question in the most chilling way possible. I found the knives missing from the kitchen drawer 2 weeks later. Billy's heart pounded. I asked him about it. He laughed, said I was paranoid, that I watched too many crime documentaries. Billy felt nauseous. I put them back myself. I didn't tell Michelle. I didn't tell the kids. I didn't tell the police. I told myself I was being dramatic. Billy sat forward now, elbows on his knees. Rob continued, I won't make that mistake again. If something happens to me or Michelle, it will not be an accident. And I won't allow Nick to rewrite the story as grief. Billy reached the last page. And that's where Rob made his final request. If I'm gone, I don't want Nick to benefit from my death. Not financially, not emotionally, not symbolically. No inheritance, no photos, no legacy. Nothing he can twist into a narrative of victimhood. Billy read the next line out loud without realizing it. He's already taken enough. Billy stared at the page. This wasn't rage. This was a man drawing a line he wished he never had to draw. At the bottom of the letter, Rob had written one final instruction. Listen to the recording. It explains what I can't write. Billy reached for the flash drive. It was old, cheap, probably bought at a drugstore. He plugged it into his laptop. There was only one file. Audio_11-29.wave. The date made Billy's stomach drop. Thanksgiving weekend. He hit play. Rob's voice filled the room. Tired. Older. But unmistakably himself. If you're hearing this, Billy, it means I didn't get a second chance. Rob paused. Took a breath. I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishment. It's about protection. Billy leaned closer. I believe Nick is capable of hurting us. I don't say that lightly. I've denied it for years. Michelle sees it too. She just doesn't want to believe it. Billy squeezed his eyes shut. I don't want my other children haunted by guilt. I don't want Romy blaming herself. I don't want Tracy or Jake wondering if they could have done more. Rob's voice cracked. I want the truth to live somewhere safe. With someone who knew me. Who won't exploit it. Who won't soften it. The recording ended abruptly. Billy sat there long after the silence returned. Now ask yourself something. If you were Billy Crystal, what would you do? Would you hand this over to police immediately? Would you share it with the family? Would you bury it to protect Rob's legacy? Because here's where things get complicated. Billy didn't go public. Not right away. He didn't release the audio. He didn't give interviews. Instead, he called Tracy. She arrived hours later. Pale, furious, shattered. Billy played her the recording. She listened without interrupting. When it ended, she didn't cry. She whispered, he never said that to me. Jake arrived next. Then Romy. Each reaction was different. Jake wanted everything documented. Timestamped. Preserved. Romy couldn't listen past the first 2 minutes. Tracy sat silently, staring at the wall. And Nick? Nick had no idea the letter existed. Not yet. But the will. That was another matter. Because the legal paperwork mirrored Rob's words exactly. No inheritance. No memorabilia. No family photos. Not even personal letters. Nick's name was effectively erased. When Nick's attorney received a copy, his response was immediate. He called it cruel, vindictive, evidence of long-standing bias. He claimed Rob had emotionally abandoned Nick long before his death. But then something unexpected happened. Nick didn't contest the will. Let that sink in. He didn't fight it. He didn't scream injustice. He didn't demand explanations. Instead, from his holding cell, he sent a single message through his lawyer. I don't need his money. I just want the truth to come out. That message changed everything. Because suddenly, the question wasn't just whether Nick killed his parents. It was whether Rob knew something so devastating that he tried to stop it from surviving him. And then, just when Billy thought the worst was behind him, a detective called. They wanted to know if Rob had ever mentioned recordings. Billy didn't answer right away. He looked at the flash drive. He looked at the letter. And he realized something terrifying. Rob hadn't just left a message. He'd left evidence. And evidence doesn't stay hidden for long, especially when someone else knows it exists. Because the next morning, Billy received an anonymous text. One sentence. I know about the recording. No sender. No explanation. Just a warning. Billy's phone slipped from his hand. Because suddenly, the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was being hunted. And what came next would force Billy to choose between loyalty and survival, and expose secrets that were never meant to be heard. How does a father go from bouncing his son on his knee to fearing he might not survive the night? What line has to be crossed? Not once, but again and again, before love transforms into fear. This chapter isn't about speculation. It's about truth. The kind that families hide. The kind that Hollywood ignores. And the kind that, for Rob Reiner, came far too late. Let's start with a moment. A quiet one. Just a memory. It's 2008. The Brentwood estate is alive with sound. Laughter. Footsteps. Tracy is home for the weekend. Jake's got his camera out again. Romy's playing piano in the sunroom. Michelle is baking something. Always baking. And Nick? He's 15. He's upstairs. Alone. Writing something no one will see for another 15 years. A script. A story. One where a father dies suddenly, and the son is the only one left standing. Back then, Rob thought it was creative angst. Teen rebellion. What parent hasn't seen a moody child spiral into strange stories? He read the script once, quietly, and then buried it in his desk drawer. He never brought it up again. But it was the first seed. The first flicker of something that didn't feel right. Nick Reiner had always been different from his siblings. Tracy was composed, meticulous, loyal. Jake was reflective, curious, kind. Romy was emotional, intuitive, empathetic. But Nick? He was a storm. 1 minute charming. The next, ice cold. Brilliant in conversations. Scathing in silence. His intelligence was clear. He'd inherited Rob's wit. Michelle's insight. But there was something else, too. Something jagged. By 18, Nick had already been to rehab twice. Prescription drugs at first. Then harder substances. Cocaine. Xanax. Adderall abuse. The first overdose came at 19. In a West Hollywood apartment he'd rented with friends who disappeared the moment he collapsed. Rob covered it up. Quietly. A donation to the hospital. A private counselor flown in from out of state. No headlines. No TMZ. Just whispers. And a father desperate to save his son from becoming a cautionary tale. But you can't save someone who doesn't think they're drowning. Nick left treatment early. He claimed it was a spiritual awakening. He said the doctors didn't understand him. He moved back into the guest house. That's when things got worse. Between 2015 and 2020, police were called to the Reiner estate 7 times. Noise complaints, verbal disturbances, suspicious activity reports. But no arrests. No charges. Rob handled it. Every time. The neighbors stopped asking questions. They assumed it was the cost of being famous. Of being Reiners. But inside that home, tension thickened like fog. One night, according to a source close to the family, Michelle locked herself in the master bedroom after a screaming match between Rob and Nick escalated to furniture being smashed. Nick was 27. He punched a hole in the kitchen wall. Screamed that his father was a fraud who only ever used people for stories. Jake later told friends he slept with a baseball bat in his room that week. Tracy refused to visit unless Nick was away. Romy, still living at home part-time during college, began staying with friends instead. And Rob? He said nothing publicly. But privately, he told Billy Crystal the words that would haunt both of them. He doesn't just hate me, Billy. He blames me. But for what? For his fame? His absence? For giving him too much? Or not enough? There's a phrase therapists use in family systems therapy: invisible contracts. Unspoken beliefs passed from parent to child. Nick, in many ways, had inherited something he didn't want. The Reiner name. The legacy. The weight of being his father's son. He tried to write. Tried to direct. Tried to act. But nothing stuck. His projects flopped or were shelved. He'd pitch studios who'd smile, take his meetings, and then disappear. Doors opened for Nick, but never stayed open. He didn't understand why. Rob did. Because talent isn't inherited, it's developed. And Nick never developed the discipline, only the resentment. By 2021, their relationship had all but collapsed. Nick was still living in the guest house, but Rob and Michelle no longer entered it. The family had code names and texts. Raincloud meant Nick. Window meant safety. There was even a family group chat without Nick. And yet, no one cut him off. Why? Because Rob still hoped, still believed, still loved him, even when he feared him. The breaking point came in February 2023. Romy was home from New York for a week. She'd brought her girlfriend over, someone Nick had never met. Dinner was awkward, tense. Nick barely spoke. Then, according to two family sources, he made a dark joke at the table. Something about how everyone's gonna die someday. Might as well make it interesting. Romy laughed nervously, but Michelle froze. Later that night, she confronted him. Nick denied everything. He said Romy was lying for attention, that Michelle always picked sides, that Rob had poisoned the family against him. The next morning, Michelle told Rob, "I don't feel safe anymore." That same week, Rob updated the security system, installed new locks, added emergency alerts on his phone tied to the front and back doors. And then he wrote the letter, the one he gave to Billy Crystal, the one that said, "Don't leave Nick anything, not even a photo." Because by then, Rob wasn't just afraid of what Nick might say. He was afraid of what Nick might do. And he was right. So where does that leave us? Do we believe Nick is a monster? Or do we see a man unraveling under pressure, addiction, and mental illness? Can both things be true? Was Rob's fear justified? Or was it the result of years of silence, shame, and unspoken pain? There's one story, one no one in the family wanted public, that might answer that. A journal entry found in Michelle's nightstand, dated July 19, 2023, scrawled in ink, barely legible. "Nick scared me tonight. I told Rob." He tried to downplay it again. "I'm not mad. I'm just tired. I miss who Nick used to be. Or maybe I only imagined that version. Maybe we all did." That line, "maybe we all did," it says everything. Because sometimes the person you love most is the one you can't reach. And sometimes, the person who needs help most won't take it. But here's the twist. Just when the family thought they had drawn a clear line, Rob and Michelle in one world, Nick in another, something happened. A week before the murders, Nick sent an email. To all of them. Subject line, "Truce." The body of the message was short. "I know I've messed up. I know I haven't made it easy. I just want one more chance. Dinner next week? Just us. One last time before the new year." Some interpreted it as genuine. Others saw it as bait. Rob never responded. Michelle drafted a reply, but never sent it. Tracy refused to even read it. Jake saved a screenshot, just in case. "Romy?" She wrote one word. "No." That email was later recovered from Nick's laptop, along with another file, a Word document, titled simply, "Closure." The contents? We'll get to that. But know this. Rob Reiner was a man who spent his life telling stories. Happy ones, sad ones, brave ones. But his final story wasn't scripted. It was real. And in it, the villain might have been the boy he once held in his arms. The one he tried to save. The one he eventually feared. The one who, if the evidence is to be believed, may have taken everything from him. But what came next wasn't about Nick anymore. It was about the rest of the family. Because one of them was hiding something too. And when their secret came out, even Billy Crystal wasn't ready for what it revealed. What does silence sound like when it's deafening? Not the kind you find in a peaceful room or a quiet park. No, the kind that sits behind a daughter's eyes as she watches her family implode and says nothing. Because Tracy Reiner wasn't loud about her grief. She didn't scream on the courthouse steps. She didn't take to social media. She didn't grant interviews. But inside, she was burning. And no one saw it coming. Tracy Reiner had always been the composed one. The oldest. The organizer. The protector. You know the type. Every family has one. The one who remembers birthdays. The one who books the Airbnb. The one who steps in before disaster strikes, and when it does, is already holding the towel and a backup charger. In a Hollywood family bursting with talent, tragedy, and headlines, Tracy stayed off the radar. She liked it that way. She wasn't flashy like Jake. Not dreamy and artistic like Romy. Not erratic and unpredictable like Nick. She was solid, unshakable. Until December 14th. That's the day she cracked. When Tracy got the call that her parents were dead, she was in Palm Springs. She'd just finished a script consult with an independent production house. It was sunny, 84 degrees. Her assistant said she looked relaxed, focused. Her phone rang at 10:41 a.m. It was Jake. She didn't answer. He called again and again. She finally picked up. 37 seconds into the call, she dropped the phone and vomited into a planter outside the cafe. She drove back to Brentwood in silence. No music, no calls, just the sound of the wind and the occasional honk as she swerved on the 10 freeway. When she arrived at the house, the scene was roped off. Police everywhere. Yellow tape. Reporters gathering on the corner like vultures. Billy Crystal was already there. He met her at the curb. "Don't go in," he whispered. She looked at him, unblinking. "Are they both?" Billy nodded. Tracy didn't cry. Not then. Not when the coroner wheeled out the stretchers. Not when Romy collapsed into her arms. Not even when Jake handed her the flash drive Rob had left behind. She simply said, "I knew this would happen." Let's rewind. Tracy had been estranged from Nick for nearly 4 years. The last time they'd spoken face-to-face was during a therapy session Rob had insisted on. Jake was there too. Michelle had arranged it at a private clinic in Malibu. It lasted 28 minutes before Nick stormed out. The argument? Money. Nick believed he was owed more. Tracy believed he had already taken enough. "I watched Mom pawn her jewelry to cover your rehab," she snapped. "You don't get to lecture me about what's fair." Nick exploded, accused her of emotional manipulation, said she had Daddy's favor. Jake tried to mediate. It only got worse. Nick stood up and punched the wall, then looked Tracy in the eyes and said, "You think I won't hurt you just because we share blood?" Those words never left her. After that session, she told Rob, "If he ever sets foot in that house again, I'm done." Rob said it would be different next time. Tracy said there wouldn't be a next time. She kept her promise. But now, her parents were gone, and Nick was in custody. And suddenly Tracy had something she hadn't felt in years. Power. Real power. Because she held a secret. A big one. The kind of secret that could change how everyone saw Rob's murder. One she'd kept hidden even from Billy. A diary. Her mother's diary. Found in the bottom drawer of a linen chest in the guest room. Wrapped in a scarf. Beneath stacks of holiday linens. The entries weren't dated in the traditional sense. Michelle had a system of symbols. Seasons. Weather. Names. But Tracy knew her mother's handwriting. Knew her rhythm. And one passage stopped her cold. "He's watching us again. I can feel it. He doesn't knock anymore, just walks in. Stands in the hallway. I asked Rob to change the locks. He said it would only make things worse. I wonder if I should leave, just for a while. But where would I go?" Tracy read the entry 10 times. Then flipped forward. "Today I found Rob crying in the closet. I've never seen him like that. He said, 'I'm losing my son.' I told him, 'We already lost him, honey. You just haven't buried the body yet.' I didn't mean it that way, but maybe I did." It was dated, roughly, just 3 weeks before the murders. Tracy took photos of every page. Then she locked the diary away. She told no one, not even the police. Because for Tracy, this wasn't just evidence. It was vindication. Proof that she had been right. All those years of being the cold one, the harsh one, the unforgiving one. Now, she had her mother's words to back her up. And yet, she didn't feel relief. She felt rage. You might ask, why didn't she give it to the authorities? Why didn't she hand it over during the investigation? Because Tracy didn't trust anyone anymore. Not the police. Not the lawyers. Not even Jake. She'd always felt like the outsider in the family. Raised with expectations. Burdened with responsibilities. She had sacrificed. While Nick destroyed. She had cleaned up messes no one knew about. Paid off one of Nick's ex-girlfriends after a scary incident in 2020. Arranged a private psychiatric evaluation after he trashed a rental home in Ojai. And the whole time, her parents begged her to stay in the family. Now, there was no family left. And she wasn't going to let the world paint Nick as a tragic son or misunderstood genius. Not on her watch. So she waited. Planned. Watched. Because Tracy believed something no one else wanted to say out loud. Nick's not the only one with blood on his hands. What did she mean by that? Did she believe someone helped him? Or that someone let it happen? She didn't say, but we know this. At her parents' memorial, Tracy didn't speak. She didn't cry. She sat in the second row, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. Romy sobbed next to her. Jake gave a speech. Billy read a passage from Rob's favorite novel. Tracy stayed silent. Until the end. When everyone began to leave, she walked up to the portrait of her parents, whispered something no one could hear, then turned and left without saying goodbye. Billy asked her later what she'd said. She replied, "I told them I was sorry for not doing it myself." Billy didn't ask what she meant. He didn't want to know. But there's one more piece. One last twist. 3 days after the funeral, Tracy received an anonymous package. No return address. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Don't trust everyone who's grieving." The file on the drive? A surveillance clip, dated the night before the murder. It showed the front gate of the Brentwood estate, and it showed a car pulling in at 2:41 a.m. Headlights off, license plate covered. Tracy watched the clip in silence. Then, without hesitation, she drove to the police station. She gave them the drive. She gave them the diary. And she gave them one more thing. A list of names. People who'd been in and out of the house in the last month. Staff, friends, family. And one name stood out. Someone no one suspected. Someone who had a key. But what came next would reveal that the Reiner family's tragedy wasn't just about one broken son. It was about a broken system, a broken silence, and one final betrayal no one saw coming. What would you do if the only way to protect your family was to record them? Not for posterity, not for nostalgia, but for safety, for evidence, for survival. Because Jake Reiner wasn't just a son. He wasn't just the middle child of a Hollywood dynasty. He was a journalist. And as any good journalist knows, truth is fragile. So when Jake pressed record, he didn't do it out of malice. He did it because he didn't know who his brother was anymore. And he wasn't sure anyone else wanted to know, either. Let's go back. Long before the murders, before the media frenzy, before Nick was a headline, Jake Reiner had already hit record. It started in 2022. Jake had just wrapped a field piece for his Los Angeles news station, an expose on elder abuse in private care homes. He was emotionally drained, but something stuck with him, something a whistleblower had said. "If you don't document it, it didn't happen." That line haunted him, especially as Nick began spiraling again. Jake didn't live at the Brentwood estate anymore. He'd moved out years ago, but he still visited often, especially for Sunday dinners. And at those dinners, something was always off. Nick would pick fights out of nowhere, comment on old arguments like they had just happened yesterday. One night, he told Jake, "One day, this house will be mine. Not because they gave it to me, but because it'll be empty." Everyone laughed awkwardly, except Jake, because he saw it. The seriousness, the calculation. He went home that night and opened a voice memo app, labeled the file Nick, Dinner 1. It became a habit. Every dinner, every conversation, every family meeting that Nick attended, recorded, archived, hidden. The files weren't scandalous at first, just tension, snide remarks, sarcastic jabs, the kind of passive-aggressive chaos families chalk up to just how he is. But then came the one that changed everything. September 3rd, 2023. A conversation between Rob and Nick in the study. Jake had left his phone charging on a side table, recording, screen off. He hadn't meant to leave it there. But what it captured would later be submitted as evidence. "Rob, you've got to stop treating this house like a hotel. You live here, Nick. You live here. Act like it. Nick, I live here because I'm not a liar like the rest of you. I'm not faking it. I'm not trying to be the perfect kid. Rob, that's not what this is about. Nick, you think I don't see the way you all look at me? Like I'm a bomb waiting to go off. Rob, quiet. Sometimes I think you are." A pause. Then Nick's voice drops to a chilling calm. "Maybe I am. And maybe the only way you'll really listen is after it's too late." Jake didn't hear that recording until a week later. He cried. Then he labeled the file, "Dad, last warning." Jake didn't stop there. He bought a GoPro, concealed it inside a hollowed-out book on the living room shelf. He synced it with a remote trigger on his phone. He placed another recorder in the laundry room, disguised as a plug-in air freshener. He set up a private hard drive, not cloud-based, physical, hidden in a fireproof box beneath his bed. Was it obsessive? Maybe, but he knew something no one else did. Nick had once followed him home, unannounced, showed up outside Jake's apartment in Silver Lake at 2 a.m. Jake didn't tell the family. He didn't call the police. He just started recording everything. Because Jake had made a decision. If something happened, He was going to make sure Nick didn't get to write the final version. After the murders, Jake waited. He didn't turn in the recordings right away. Not because he wanted to protect Nick, but because he didn't know who else the tapes might expose. One of them did. Tape number 14, After Hours. It captured Michelle crying alone in the kitchen. The audio is grainy. She's whispering to herself. I don't know how to tell him. I don't know how to say I'm afraid. Jake hadn't known that existed until he started combing the footage 2 days after the funeral. He had to stop the file halfway through. He couldn't breathe. He kept imagining her there, in the same kitchen, not knowing what was coming. Or maybe, knowing exactly what was coming. He transferred the file onto a separate flash drive, labeled it Mom, Truth. Then, without telling Tracy or Romy, he mailed it to Billy Crystal. A single line written on the envelope. She knew. Billy called him that night. Didn't say a word. Just breathed. And hung up. But there was one more tape. One that wasn't meant for the public. One that Jake hadn't shown anyone. Not yet. It wasn't about Nick. It wasn't about the will. It was about Tracy. It was a private conversation, accidentally recorded. Between Tracy and Michelle on the back patio, 2 months before the murders. Jake had forgotten the mic was on. And what it captured was a confession. Tracy, low, firm. I've thought about it. What life would be like if he was just gone. Michelle, softly. Don't say that. Tracy, why not? You've thought it too. You just won't say it out loud. Michelle, I'm his mother. Tracy, and I'm tired of being scared. There was no plot discussed. No threat. Nothing actionable. But it revealed something that hadn't been acknowledged out loud. The fear was everywhere. Even the strongest among them had imagined a world without Nick. And now that world existed. And it was worse than they'd ever imagined. Jake sat with that tape for days. Debated deleting it. Burning it. Pretending it never existed. Because if it got out, it wouldn't just ruin Tracy's reputation. It would taint the whole case. It would give Nick's defense team ammunition. Claims of bias, of conspiracy, of a family out to get him. But Jake didn't delete it. He locked it away. Because part of him believed it was evidence. Not of guilt, but of truth. The kind of truth that prosecutors miss. The kind that juries feel in their gut. The kind that says, this didn't come out of nowhere. This was a slow-motion collapse. A family trying to hold up a roof already rotting from the inside. So now Jake had a choice. Expose it? Protect it? Tell Tracy? Stay silent? He wasn't sure. All he knew was this. The tapes didn't lie. And if the court wanted the truth, they'd have to listen. Because Jake Reiner had captured something no one else could. The moment when love turned into fear. When denial turned into defense. And when a family realized one of their own had become a stranger. But the most shocking tape, the one that would change the entire case, wasn't even about the murder. It was about the night before. Because Jake had left a camera running by accident. And what it captured was a visitor. One the police hadn't identified. One who entered the property and never left through the gate. And when Jake finally played that footage, he recognized the silhouette. But what came next would turn suspicion on its head. Because the person in that video wasn't Nick. And it wasn't a stranger. It was someone who claimed they hadn't been at the house at all that night. And when Jake confronted them, they didn't deny it. They simply said, you weren't supposed to see that. What secrets does a house hold when the people inside it stop telling the truth? And more importantly, what happens when those secrets don't just hide in closets or drawers, but behind the very walls? Because the Reiner estate in Brentwood wasn't just a home. It was a stage, a fortress, and, as it turns out, a crime scene with layers. This is the chapter where everything starts to twist. Because what was first seen as a straightforward double murder, father and mother killed, son arrested, end of story, was about to fracture wide open. And it all began with a blueprint. The Brentwood estate was built in 1987. Rob and Michelle Reiner purchased it in 1991 for $4.3 million. A sprawling, 6-bedroom, 7-bath mansion with oak floors, French doors, and a view of the canyon that made studio heads weep. But over the years, the property grew. An artist's studio, a wine cellar, a second garage. Then came the guest house, originally meant for visiting relatives. But after Nick's first return from rehab, it became a more permanent residence, separate from the main house, but still within walking distance. Over time, additions blurred the lines. A greenhouse, a stone meditation circle, a panic room installed in 2017 after a break-in scare. And it was the panic room that changed everything. You see, during a routine post-crime walkthrough, detectives noticed something strange. A door in the east hallway that didn't appear on the architectural plans filed with the city. It was clean, flush with the wall, no handle, but Jake remembered it. He said as a kid he once opened it, accidentally. Behind it, a narrow stairwell leading downward. To what? He didn't know. For years, it was forgotten, covered by a bookshelf, literally hidden in plain sight. Police obtained a warrant and pried it open. What they found stunned them. A private office, sealed, soundproof, climate-controlled, no windows, just a desk, a chair, a vault-style cabinet, and a motion-activated security system that hadn't been triggered in months. Inside the cabinet, over a dozen file boxes labeled in Rob's handwriting, each one with a name, some of them familiar. Tracy, Jake, Nick, Romy, Michelle, and then a box labeled evidence. Detectives froze. They called Billy Crystal, who was listed as Rob's emergency contact in the estate records. Billy arrived an hour later. He walked into the hidden room, looked around, and said one sentence. He really was preparing for something. Let's talk about what was in those boxes, because this is where the story splinters into the surreal. In Nick's box, copies of psychiatric evaluations dating back to 2009. At least 3 doctors had raised concerns over potential sociopathic tendencies. One note read, "Subject shows consistent patterns of manipulation, lack of empathy, and refusal to acknowledge consequence." In Michelle's box, letters, dozens, written but never sent. Some to old friends, some to herself. One simply titled, "When I'm Gone." But the real storm was in the box labeled evidence. Inside, a combination of printed emails, surveillance screenshots, and handwritten notes. Notes detailing times Nick entered the main house unannounced. Strange credit card charges tied to Michelle's account. Conversations Rob had secretly recorded with security staff. One particularly disturbing item was a printed text exchange between Nick and a number listed as unknown. Nick, this week, I'm done playing the good son. Unknown, make sure there's no loose ends. That phone number had since been disconnected, but police traced it to a prepaid burner purchased at a Rite Aid. CCTV footage from the store? Corrupted. Naturally. But the clerk, when shown Nick's photo, allegedly said, "Yeah, he bought 2. Said one was a backup." Now let's shift to the room itself. Jake helped investigators piece together its history. According to him, Rob began building the room in 2016 after Nick's second overdose. At the time, he called it a man cave, a retreat, but it wasn't. It was a vault, a sanctuary, a place to put the truth when no one else wanted to hold it. And what Rob had done inside those walls was chillingly methodical. A full timeline was found, tacked to a corkboard, marked with entries like July 12th, Michelle says she's scared again. August 9th, Nick found watching Romy's window. November 3rd, panic room dry run. Batteries replaced. Each entry had timestamps. Photos. Annotations. Rob Reiner, the man who gave us heartwarming films and feel-good classics, was documenting his family like a crime novel in real time. Why? Because he didn't trust anyone else to believe him. But the most chilling discovery wasn't paperwork. It was a video. Stored on a dusty hard drive labeled home footage_3. Footage from the night of the murders. Captured through a secondary motion sensor camera no one knew about. Installed by Rob himself, likely without Michelle or Nick's knowledge. The video shows the kitchen. 2:58 a.m. A figure enters through the back door. Face obscured by hoodie. Barefoot. Moves with precision. Heads toward the security panel. Disarms it. Then walks toward the study. 2 minutes later, another figure enters. This one's shorter. Also barefoot. Also hooded. Detectives believe the second figure was Michelle. She steps into the kitchen and freezes. The first figure turns. They speak. No audio. Then a flash of motion. A struggle. A collapse. The first figure drags Michelle's body toward the study. Then, 2 minutes later, Rob enters. He runs toward her. Drops to the floor. The attacker emerges from the shadows. And everything goes black. But here's where things take a turn. Nick claims he never left the guest house. His legal team insists the footage is inconclusive, too dark, too grainy. But there's one detail that broke the case wide open. A scar, visible for just one frame as the hoodie shifts. An old, crescent-shaped scar on the right forearm. Identical to the one Nick received in 2017 during a car accident in Topanga Canyon. Coincidence? Nick's team says yes. Detectives say no. Tracy says nothing. Jake? He says everything. He took screenshots, overlaid images, labeled files. He printed the frame, highlighted the scar, and wrote in red ink across the top. He was inside. And yet, that still didn't explain the second figure. The one presumed to be Michelle. Who had let the first figure in? Why hadn't the panic room alarm been triggered? How did Nick know the override code? Or, did someone else give it to him? Remember that surveillance footage Jake found? Chapter 5? The one with the unidentified visitor? The timestamp matches exactly with the moment the security system was deactivated. 2:41 a.m. Someone else was on the property. Someone who was never supposed to be there. And here's the wild part. Security logs show the system was turned off using a keycard. But only 4 people had physical keycards. Rob, Michelle, Tracy, and Jake. So when detectives saw the login data, they paused. Because the keycard used was labeled Jake GH, guest house, Jake's personal access card. But Jake swore he hadn't been there. He was home, asleep. He had text logs, emails, time-stamped security cam footage from his own apartment to prove it. So how did his keycard end up on the scene? Let's recap. There's a panic room built in secret. A surveillance system only one person understood. Footage showing at least 2 figures, one with a scar matching Nick. A keycard labeled with Jake's name used to deactivate the alarm. And Rob Reiner, master storyteller, hiding all of it in a sealed office, waiting for the day someone might need to see the truth. Well, that day came. And suddenly, Nick's trial wasn't just about murder. It was about how much everyone else already knew. How much was tolerated, ignored, protected. But the question that still hadn't been answered? Who was the second figure? Because if it wasn't Michelle, if it wasn't Jake, that meant someone else had entered the house. Someone who hadn't come through the gate, hadn't left through the door, had simply vanished. And when the Brentwood Estates crawl spaces were finally searched top to bottom, investigators found something behind the wine cellar. A small, concealed panel. And behind it, a tunnel. A narrow, hand-dug passage, leading not to the guest house, but to a storm drain at the end of the block, which meant whoever came in that night might have come through the tunnel, might have left that way too. And now? The list of suspects just exploded, because Nick may have been the villain in this story. But what if he wasn't alone? What if someone else walked beside him into the dark? And what if they're still out there? How do you keep breathing when the people who raised you are gone in an instant? How do you trust again when the monster might be your own brother? Or worse, when you realize the monster might have been growing inside you. This chapter is about Romy, the youngest, the softest, the one they all tried to protect, until the moment she was the one who found them. And suddenly, innocence was over. Forever. Romy Reiner wasn't supposed to be there that morning. She was scheduled to fly back to New York the night before, where she lived part-time in a loft near Soho. But a delayed flight, a gut feeling, and a missed phone call from her mom changed everything. It's the kind of twist no one writes into a screenplay. And yet, it was all too real. She arrived at the Brentwood estate at 10:18 a.m. on December 14th. She'd sent a text the night before. Landing got pushed. Staying the night. Can I grab bagels in the morning? No reply. Odd, but not terrifying. She figured maybe her mom had fallen asleep early. But by 10 a.m., she felt that itch. You know the one. The one that says, something's off. So she drove over. Barefoot. Like always. And the next 10 minutes became a blur. Blood. Silence. Her father's hand limp on the island counter. Her mother's head slumped sideways. The cold. The absence. And a feeling she would later describe as everything familiar being erased in a second. Romy's 911 call has already become infamous. But what you didn't hear was the trembling breath between sentences. The silence as the dispatcher asked if she could check for a pulse. The pause when she said, I think I know who did it. Because in that moment, Romy didn't know, but she felt. And sometimes, feeling is more dangerous than knowing. Romy had always been close to her mother. They texted every day, shared recipes, exchanged book lists. Michelle had described her as my mirror. But with Nick, it was complicated. He was her big brother, her protector, and sometimes her predator. She loved him deeply, fiercely, even when it scared her. But over the years, love morphed into fear. She tried not to let it show, until she couldn't hide it anymore. There's one story Romy told only once, to her therapist. It later surfaced in court records when the family's private journals and notes were reviewed by the DA's office. She was 14. Nick was 19. They were watching a movie in the living room. Something lighthearted. Maybe The Goonies or The Princess Bride. She laughed. He didn't. He turned and said, "Do you think I'm a joke to them?" She thought he was kidding. She chuckled, and then he grabbed her wrist. Tight. Too tight. His eyes empty. He whispered, "One day, I'm going to show them." Then he let go, got up, left. She told her mother. Michelle said, "He's under a lot of pressure." Romy never brought it up again. Fast forward to 2021. Romy had just graduated from NYU. She'd come home to stay for a few weeks before moving into her own place. Nick was already living in the guest house. She ran into him late one night in the kitchen. He looked different, gaunt, wide-eyed, smiling too much.